Hello and welcome to our new lecture of Sons and Lovers by D.H. Lawrence. This lecture is going to discuss the casting off of Morel, the taking on of William, and the young life of Paul. Without further ado, let's get started. In this section, Morel begins to fall ill. Despite all of his requests for medicine, his illness is attributed to the time he fell asleep on the ground when he went with Jerry to Nottingham. He falls seriously ill and his wife has to nurse him with some help from the neighbors. Eventually, Morel grows better, but he has been spoiled during this illness and at first wants more attention from his wife. However, she has begun to cast him off and turn completely to her children to find a sense of meaning in her life. وهذه المرحلة عندما بدأ الاهتمام بالأطفال يزداد أكثر وأكثر عند السيدة موريل. During the period of peace following Morel's illness, the family has another child, Arthur, who is born when Paul is 17 months old. Arthur is very fond of his father, and this makes Mrs. Morel happy. We can see that Mrs. Morel does actually desire to have her whole family together as one. She thinks that her happiest moments come when her children seem to love their father. Mrs. Morel joins the Women's Guild, a club of women attached to the cooperative wholesale society who meet and discuss social questions. When William is 13, she gets him a job at the co-op office. This provokes another argument with her husband, who would have preferred his son to become a miner like himself. However, William does well in his job as he does well in everything. Mrs. Morel does not want her eldest son to become like his father. She refuses to let him enter the mines. هذه الفقرة تظهر معاناة ويليام بالاهتمام الزائد من والدته. William clashes with his mother when he begins to dance. Mrs. Morel turns away girls who come to call, much to William's dismay. Mrs. Morel disapproves of his dancing because this might bring the memory of her dance with Mr. Morel at the start of their relationship. Upon the departure of William, the affection of Mrs. Morel changed towards Paul. Mrs. Morel begins to treat Paul differently from other children. Despite the love and devotion between William and his mother, they quarrel over William dancing. This might be the beginning of a change in the relationship between William and Mrs. Morel, as his acceptance of the dance corresponds to his rejection of his mother. وهذه تعتبر انطلاقة جديدة بتغير الأحداث بحدوث مشاكل بين Mrs. Morel and her son William. At 19, William gets a new job in Nottingham and also begins to study very hard. Then he is offered a job in London at £120 a year. This work makes him fail to see his mother's dismay at his departure. William gets to London to start his new life away from his mother. The young life of Paul. This section begins by describing the way that Paul, in the absence of William, bonded most closely with his sister Annie. She was a tomboy who played games with the other neighborhood children, and Paul would quietly tag along behind her. There is a sense that Paul represents all of the children, that narrating what happens to Paul is enough for describing the experience of all of them. This is created partly by the way that all of the events in this section are told in relation to Paul, and partly by passages like the following in which the subject Paul and the children are used seemingly interchangeably. The family moves out of the bottoms into a house with an ash tree, which makes noise when the wind blows through it. Morel likes it, but the children hate it. The father keeps the same drinking habit, which makes Paul worry over his mother's. Due to this matter, the children start detaching from their father and become closer to their mother. Therefore, it becomes apparent that Morel is an outsider in his own family. The disagreement about the ash tree is representative of the conflict between father and children. The next part of the narration, however, describes the times of happiness between Morel and his children. When he is happily engrossed in his work, he gets along well with his children. He tells stories like the ones about Taffy the horse. On these nights, when Morel has some job to do, he goes to bed early and the children feel secure when he is in bed. One day, Paul comes home at dinner time feeling ill and does not go back to school. It turns out that he has bronchitis, معنى التهاب الشعب. His father visits him while he is ill, but he asks for his mother because sleeping with her comforts him. We also see further evidence of the way that Paul is treated differently from the other children. He is more delicate, and Mrs. Morel realizes it. Physically, Paul resembles his mother, and like each of the children, he picks up on and shares her anxieties about her husband. The final part of this section concerns the preparations made for William's visit at Christmas. The three other children go to the station to meet him and get very discouraged when the train is more than 2 hours late. At last, however, the train arrives with William. At home, the parents are also anxious and begin to quarrel slightly. But finally, the children arrive. William has brought presents for everyone, and everyone feels happy. After he returns to London, William is offered a trip to Mediterranean over the midsummer holiday. However, he declines in favor of returning home, much to the delight of his mother. Even though Paul is treated differently, William is still Mrs. Morel's favorite. She thinks of him as a successful young man in London and imagines him as her knight in shining armor. And finally, here we are with some important quotations such as, "Dance if you want to dance, my son, but don't think you can work in the office and then amuse yourself and then study on top of all." هذه الفقرة تمثل بداية النزاع والمشاكل حول مسألة الرقص وحول مسألة عمل ويليام. The second quotation is, "They want me, mother, at 120 a year and don't even ask to see me. Didn't I tell you I could do it?" هذا يمثل بداية النجاح لويليام عندما تحدث مع والدته التي ظنت أنه لن ينجح في هذا الأمر. The third quotation is, "In front of the house was a huge old ash tree. The west wind sweeping from Derbyshire caught the houses with full force and the tree shrieked again. Morel liked it." هذا الكوتيشن يمثل مرحلة انتقال هذه العائلة إلى بيت جديد، ويمثل مرحلة انفصال الأبناء بشكل أكبر عن أبيهم. This quotation is said by the narrator, of course. This is the end of our lecture, and I hope to see you in the next one.